all know how much fun it is to be in the cloud. We still have people coming on, but it's about time to start. So if you're new, welcome.
Oh, it looks bad.
My name's Dave Tarvin. I'm the host today. Andy is the co-host. And just to make everybody aware that I live up in the foothills and I have a hard time with my connection, my Wi-Fi connection. So if something happens, I'm just going to turn the meeting over to Andy and then he'll run the rest of the meeting. But I've been on the Zoom thing now for about an hour. Seems to be okay. So, but like everybody else dealing with the smoke, that's been one of the problems for me. So anyways, it's time to start. And first one up, actually, oh, hang on a second. So I'm doing everything out with my computer and it's a little, I haven't done this before. Anyways, our first storyteller today is Ed Lewis. His story is entitled My Mentor, Dale Nacken. Now, if you do not know Ed, I would be very surprised. If you have been to any storytelling event, even heard of storytelling, I'm sure that you have either seen or spoken to Ed. He's currently the president of the Sacramento Guild. He sits on the board of the Storytelling Association of California. He puts on events. He is a great storyteller and a great human being. And his stories are wonderful. And the one before I forget, he is a world traveler. So he often tells stories that are just amazing. So Ed, in 1 minute, I'm going to put everybody on mute. And then when it's your turn to tell, you can unmute yourself. Okay. So I'm going to, all right, I'm not sure how to mute everybody.
Mute all down at the bottom.
I'm looking at the bottom. It just says audio settings.
The chat. You have to click on the participant button first.
Oh, participants. Yeah. All right. There we go.
And then at the bottom of that, you should see a mute all.
Mute all. All right. Here we go. So Ed, you can unmute yourself and start your story when you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me as a storyteller today. Son, you have just joined a team of professionals who you need to listen to and respect. These professionals have a lot to teach you. So definitely pay attention and make sure that you are attentive to whatever they say. Now, you are going to make mistakes in your first job, and mistakes are an opportunity for learning. But just don't make the same mistake twice. Above all, make sure that you take pride in your work and tell the others when they have helped you. Respectfully treat them as teammates. I took a job with the Cyclone Fence Division of United States Steel in 1964 after I graduated from high school. And my first boss was Dale Nacken. He was a Native American farmer from Montana who ran a fence crew. So I had the opportunity, the first job I took was to work for him. And the reason I got that job was because my father was the West Coast manager of Cyclone Fence. Now I was a little leery about going into this work because I felt like maybe people wouldn't be quite so honest with me since I was the boss's son. And maybe they'd give me special privileges. But I soon found out, as little did I know, that my father had put me with a no-nonsense leader that had very, very high expectations. Now, he also was a compassionate, loving person. And I maintained a relationship with him the rest of my life, the rest of his life. The first job we had was to build a baseball backstop. This wasn't the straight up baseball backstop. It was the curved kind. It was very complicated. When I looked at it, it seemed like a puzzle because you had to bend pipe to fit wherever there was a curve. You had to be strong. You had to climb up these ladders, and you had, I was amazed at Dale because he could just hang off one hand and then fit pipe, tie down wire, tie the fence in. I was slow, but he was very patient with me, very clear instructions, and I learned a lot that summer. One of the other things I learned was to be on time, because one night after partying on a Thursday night with my friends, I was 20 minutes late to work. Out in front of everyone, Dale let me have it. He said, there is no excuse for this, and if you come late one more time, you could easily lose your job. We have our whole team. We have a plan, and you're part of that plan, and you need to be responsible. There are many lessons I learned from Dale, and that was one of them. I was never late again. I kept my partying on the weekend. The next summer, so I was going to college for those 4 years. And the next summer, I worked with Dale building a fence, a freeway fence that went on Highway 90 in Western Washington for 40 miles over the mountains into Eastern Washington. Now, this was not an ordinary job. It was an 8-foot high game fence. You had to dig 4-foot holes, and you had to put in a square 12-foot piece wood post. You had to dig down 4 feet, and you had to do this up over the mountains. We had to make our own trails. We had to cut down some trees. We normally tried to dodge the trees, but sometimes we had to cut down trees. We had to cut down brush. We had to dig through stumps and limbs and roots that went everywhere. It was a heck of a summer. And the first day there, we had to carry these 200-pound posts out to the work site. It was only in the beginning about 200 feet. So they were all watching me. I put this post, stood it straight up, and I saw how Dale had done it. He had put 2 posts on his shoulders. They told me to start with 1. So I put 1 post on my shoulder, and I got it off the ground, and I just kept going over backwards, and I heard about that for many years to come. Well, I did eventually figure it out. I never could do 2 posts, but they were okay with 1 post. Everyone else, all the big guys, they could do the 2 posts. And one of the other things that happened on that job was that some of the area that we were going through in the mountains, we had to helicopter in all the supplies and drop them off at different spots. And we had to hike up to do our work. Hiking up a mountain with a 200-pound post is no easy task. The other thing that we had to do, which is even worse, and we had to do this in a hurry, was backpack cement from the cement truck that couldn't get far off the highway up to those posts. That was a real challenge. And we had to do it in a hurry because cement all hardened up. So we had to get it up there, get it in the holes, and then I and the other laborers had to lift up those posts to get them to the right height for Dale, because he was lining up the fence, because you had to make sure that your fence was at the right height so you could string an 8-foot fence along that line. It was very complicated. At the end of that summer, they called me the Incredible Hulk. It was a great summer. I learned a lot. The next summer, Dale had felt that I really had taken the lessons to heart. So we took a job building fences around secret missile sites in Montana. We went there for the summer. It was right below the Canadian border. and we had to build these fences all around these missile sites, silos that went down in the ground. And this is where Dale made me an iron worker. Now, in the fencing industry, you're either a laborer or an iron worker. And an iron worker means you can read the blueprints, you can set the posts, you can use, complicated tools, you could bend pipe, all that kind of stuff. Use acetylene torches. So he gave me that responsibility, and I'm glad he did it there because Montana in that area was completely flat. So learning how to set a fence line and get it just the right height was much easier at that point. And he simplified everything. He was there just encouraging me. He was a real true mentor. Well, the next summer, we went to Sun Valley, Idaho. And that, for those of you who don't know it, is a ski resort area. But they wanted to get their summer programs going. So we went there to build 23 tennis courts. And Dale said, I have faith in you. You've shown that you can take on responsibility. So you're going to build half of these tennis courts. And you can hire 2 crew members. So I called up a couple Army buddies. This was after I served my military time, got drafted during the Vietnam War, and I was back going to graduate school. So I hired a couple of my Army buddies, and they came out from Michigan and New York, and they were my crew. So building a tennis court is quite a challenge. The posts are so high. They're not, it's not extremely heavy. And by then we were totally fit. But we built those 23 tennis courts, and we've got a job building a couple others for some rich ranchers up in the mountains. It was a great summer. I learned so much. Now, when I came back after graduate school, I got a job, but every summer I would go visit Dale up in the Tulalip Indian Reservation, which is north of Seattle. He became a mentor for me and my family. I could call him anytime. He was a very sage person. He did have at one point, he had an alcohol problem, but he went to AA, got clean and sober, and he worked with the Native Americans on the reservation up there as a counselor with AA. He was an amazing man, and I thank him for everything he taught me. He lived to the age of 94 and just passed away about a month and a half ago. And Dale, I just want to tell you that I respect everything you've done for me. Whoa, get a little heavier. And I've learned so much, and I am always your protege, Ed, known as the Iron Man. Thank you.
Give Ed a big hand. Ed, that was a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. So next up is Joyce, and after Joyce will be Karen Dale. In Joyce's story, the title of her story is What Education 101 Didn't Cover. Now, sit back in your seats because I have actually shared the stage with Joyce. She is funny, she's smart, she's entertaining, but most of all, she can just draw you in and bang, you're right there in the story. So if you unmute, Joyce, start your story whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Well, it just so happens I was 20 years old and had to spend a whole nother year in college to get 8 units, and I couldn't get them until the spring semester. Now, in 1960, if you could walk and chew gum at the same time, you could get a job as a teacher. And a principal, who I thought was just flirting, brought me a contract. But he was in Cool, and I don't want to go to Cool. So I got on the phone and I called around, and sure enough, I got 5 offers, 3 interviews, and I felt comfortable with the board that interviewed me in a small 3-room schoolhouse just outside of the city limits of Woodland. Now, I think I felt comfortable because all the board members were small farmers, and I had grown up on a small farm. But if I knew then what I know now, I never would have taken the job. I had the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade in a room that was built for half the number. Next door was the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade run by the principal. And I'll tell you right now up front, he was a real jerk. But I didn't know any better. I was from a working family. And the word was, if the boss says, do it, you do it unless it's illegal. Now, there was one other teacher, Mrs. Douglas. She taught 1st and 2nd grade out in a separate room. And she was she was in her 70s. She had wanted to retire for years, but everybody kept insisting that she stay. And she turned out to be my very frank but helpful fairy godmother. Well, I went, when I signed my contract, I was only 20, but we discussed it. I was going to be 21 before school started, and they said, well, because 21 was the legal age for signing a contract then, it'll be all right. You just sign it again if. So that's the way it started. Now, if I knew I was in trouble as soon as I got about 4 binders of goals for the 3rd grade, 4 or 5 binders for the 4th grade, 4 or 5 binders for the 5th grade. And there was no way I was going to make that. And in Education 101, they always insisted that you must meet all the goals, or you must teach all the goals established by the state to the grade, proper grade. Well, the first thing I did, even before school started, I went out and talked to Mrs. Douglas. Mrs. Douglas says, you're never going to make it that way. I'll show you what you do. So she started, and it took me quite a while, and I just worked ahead of my students. We laid out all the goals, say for one subject. Let's take math. She'd lay out, you stretch the goals for the 3rd, the goal for the 4th, the goals for the 5th. Went down the list, made a list, and then you checked with the students. And you went along the list, and as the kids couldn't go any further, you dropped them off and you formed groups. I thought I was going to have about 50 groups. No. She was right. I only had about 4 groups. And the way the system worked that she taught me is you started at the beginning of the goals and you put them in sets. Let's take numeration, the value of numbers. First, you have to know the symbols, just 1 through 0. And then then there was place value, and then there was commas and 1s, 10s. Anyway, it went all the way through the 5th goals for the 5th grade. Well, the thing was, I had some 5th graders that were down in the 4th grade, and I had some 3rd graders that were up in the 5th grade. So the groups were made up of mixtures, and I thought that would be a problem. But Mrs. Douglas was right, it wasn't. So what I did is I took one area of each of the systems that we were supposed to do. The next thing she told me is, don't worry about reading. Teach your reading through your subjects. Teach your vocabulary through like science, health, PE, anything, all the subjects, so that the kids can tackle the books on their own. Well, she was right. I did do some reading, but we used our reading books almost like recreational reading. Anyway, I made it through, not using hardly anything that Education 101 taught me. Well, now there were a few other things, like bring in the elements and teach democracy by letting your children have a democratic system. Okay, one lunch period, the kids brought in a great big snake. And because of the limited room, the only place for the snake was on my desk. Well, the snake had eaten something that really smelled bad. And I was going to lose my lunch if we didn't do something. So I thought, oh, yes, we'll do this. The kids like me, and they did like me. So we'll vote. Either the snake goes or I go. Don't be too democratic in your class. I only won by one vote. Then, remember that principal I was telling you about? Oh. I was 21. This was 1960. Teachers had to wear dresses. I wore earrings and 3-inch heels. I was 21. And I also liked designer clothes. And I had shoes for everything. Well, in the fall, Mr. Know-it-all came and said, I'm too busy. You'll have to teach flag football. Flag football? I didn't even know how to play flag football. Anyway, so I got out a book that told how to do flag football. We only used 9 players because there weren't that many people to play, to tell you the truth. Well, let me tell you, it was not a pretty scene. I made it through, but I broke about 3 heels and lost I don't know how many earrings. Well, next came basketball. Now, at least I'd watched football. I knew even less about basketball. That was okay. One of the things when they interviewed me, they said, could you do a Christmas program? Sure, I could do a Christmas program. I'd done some theater. I danced all over the place. Good. Now, we did do a Christmas program, and I couldn't figure out why in the world there was such a fuss about it. We did it next door in the volunteer firehouse, which had a big community hall. There were only about 50 kids, maybe 70 kids, between 50 and 70 in the whole school. Now, you figure how many people were going to show up for a Christmas program. They packed the hall. Everybody, apparently, who had ever gone to that school, and relatives and aunts and uncles and everything, we had about 450 people come. I was shocked. Not only that, they gave me a puppy. My mother wasn't pleased with the puppy. Then came a fundraiser. Would I participate? Sure, I would. It paid for all sorts of extra things. Again, I was surprised. That little school raised $8,000 on an enchilada Mexican dinner food. I did I don't know how many. We made enchiladas for 2 days. Well, those were all positive experiences. Then my good principal would come in on a Friday afternoon and he would say, "Oh, I have to go to the county office to do some business. And my wife has the car, so can I use your car?" Wasn't illegal, so sure. Wasn't too fond of the idea, but yeah. Well, it turned out about 2 or 3 Fridays of every month, he borrowed my car to go to the county office, which I found out later he never did go to the county office, but that wasn't it. When he left, I had the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all to myself. Anyway, another time, the wind blew the door shut on one of the 7th grader's hands. And she was badly injured, but her mother was a nurse at the emergency room. So my good principal had me take her to the hospital. Of course, her mother met me right away, and it's a good thing too, because as soon as she took charge of her daughter, I passed out. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you one other thing. I had a little boy in my class called Alfred. Now, when he didn't speak much English and I didn't speak much Spanish, but I thought something was wrong with his language. Anyway, I had to fill out a form. So the county would assign him somebody to come and take care of the problem. Well, it had a sort of a medical and permission of parents kind of thing. So I went, and he lived in a sort of a commune type of thing, all relatives. There was a grandmother, grandfather, adult daughters, teenage daughters, and a range of about 15 people from newborns to adults. So I started to fill out the form and ask the questions. I thought it was language that I could not figure out. It was a mess. Anyway, finally, one of the teenage girls came in, and so she started to explain. I wasn't going to get this paperwork done. They had a system between the various adult women. When a newborn came along, if the mother wasn't in position to really devote full time and take care of that infant, she traded it off to somebody else. And then that somebody else raised that child as their child. They did this. They had these kids all traded around. Everybody was happy. All the children were taken care of. But if I filled out the paperwork correctly, it was going to be a can of worms. Well, the paperwork got filled out, and he did get help, and he did have a problem with language besides Spanish speaking. So Mrs. Douglas was very pleased with me, and she smiled and she said, "You're going to do well." she was a lifesaver. You know, she wouldn't even let the principal in her room. When he came, she'd say, "Get out, go away, don't bother me." But I didn't learn. I didn't come from anyone who knew how to tell a boss off. That same little student that I got help for, he came to school one day on a Friday when we were going to have a party. We were going to go on spring break and we were going to hide. We were dyeing Easter eggs and hiding Easter eggs. And I noticed, well, it was a very busy day. I noticed when he,
Joyce, we're running out
at
of
the end
time.
of the day, he had swollen. Before the break was over, I had the worst case of mumps my doctor said he'd ever saw. I was swollen from my ears down. I had no cleavage left. Well, I spent a lot of time sick that too. And I left. I resigned. I was never going to teach again. Never was I going to enter another classroom. But a very strange thing happened. And I ended up 40 years in the classroom, and then 10 years after that, being a support teacher, a support leader in a program called BITSA of beginning teachers, so that no teacher ever had a first year like I did. Thank you.
All right, give Joyce a big hand. That was a great story, Joyce. Very good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So next up is Karen Daly. And before we start, if you're the storyteller, please keep an eye on the chat down at the bottom in case somebody needs to send you a message. So anyways, Karen is an exciting storyteller. She was once the president of the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. She's been telling stories for a long time, and the story that she's telling today is entitled Craziness. So put on your little crazy caps, because she is going to share some weird code enforcement stories from her time with the Sacramento County. It's all yours, Karen. You just gotta unmute.
Thank you, Dave. Hello, fellow Toastmasters. Toastmasters for storytellers. Sorry, got you mixed. Anyway, I was a code enforcement officer from 1990 to 2008. And I had many interesting situations happening. I found numerous stolen vehicles hidden in backyards and garages. I found meth labs in backyards and in basements. But the most interesting were the hoarders. Now, some of you may have watched the TV program Hoarding, and they are very interesting, but I have 3 stories to share. The first one was this elderly lady who was a caregiver for a couple. And when the husband died, she stayed on and took care of the old lady. And in the will, the old lady left her property to a church, but with the stipulation that the caregiver could stay in the house until she passed away. Well, she was a hoarder. And it came to our attention when neighbors started seeing these little houses or sheds being put all over the yard. So we'd go in and check, and yes, they are full of clothes and garbage and that. But there's also about 70 garbage cans all scattered around the yard. Couldn't think what garbage would be in garbage cans, so I did check out a few, and she just stuffed more clothes in the garbage can. So when she wouldn't take care of the situation, I don't know if most of you know, the county can go to court and can get a stipulation from the court that we can go in on this situation and clear out the property. The police put her on a 5150, which is a psych hold, so she could be out of the house for 72 hours for us to get in and clean. Now, I'll tell you, over those 72 hours, and the crews worked, we worked till 10 o'clock at night. We took 40, did you understand? 40 yard dumpsters out of that house and the yard. And we never finished. We never even finished in the garage. But the big surprise, and the one that was the most interesting, was in about 30 of those big garbage containers. Did I tell you she never had a bathroom? The bathrooms were all full. She had collected even her own waste. And when we discovered that by accident, because we accidentally knocked one of the cans down and discovered what's in it, we had to have a septic company come in and clear out those garbage cans, and then the crews had to throw them away. We gave them extra for that job because as soon as those cans were opened, it was overpowering. My next story was we got calls saying, my God, there's all these cats all around. This lady is collecting cats. So we go up to the house, a very sweet lady, and she says, I only have 6 cats. And I could see probably about 6 cats in the house. And I said, well, you know that you're only limited to 4 animals in the house. So you have to make a decision what 2 you would like to give away, or maybe a neighbor or friend would take them. And then she said, well, I'll just let them go outside. They can be outside cats with some of the neighbor cats. And that started my thinking, neighbor cats, they're the ones complaining. So I said, well, let's go see what your backyard looks like. Well, there were probably about 40 cats in this beautiful backyard that she had back there. And she was feeding all the cats, wild or neighbors or cats. She just put out food and water for everybody. And thank heavens, this is where code enforcement worked very close with not only the SPCA and our own animal control. They worked with the SPCA. And so we convinced her that we would find homes for all the cats, that we promised them that none of them would be put to sleep. And she let us take the cats. But she had to promise me she would never have any more than the 4 cats in the house. And she kept her promise. I never had to go back to that house. Now, I should tell you that house that I told you about, the old lady, when I switched from Sacramento County and moved down to the city of Stockton, I got a call one time from one of my proteges in code enforcement in Sac County and said, guess who we're going after again? They had to go in a second time and a third time to clean that property before she passed away. But my most exciting and most interesting of all my stories was when I was training a brand new youngster She was probably maybe 21. And we walked up to the door, and I had told her the procedure and everything, and we knocked on the door, and the lady opened the door, and Angela went and passed out right there on the porch. The smell was so overwhelming. I could not have gone into the property to do an inspection. I had to call environmental control, my fellow officers, to come with full hazmat outfits. They brought their full hazmat outfits and went in and to do the inspection for me. What they had discovered is this very sweet lady started with 2 little mice in individual cages, but they needed friendship. So she let the 2 get together. Well, then they had little babies and she couldn't control them, and she put them in a bigger cage. And then they had more. So she just let them run free. And as mice do and rats do, they just multiplied and multiplied. Now, she was only in this unit, it was a duplex, for not quite 3 years. But when we finally got her, had the police officers take her, and I want you to know the police officers allowed her to take 2 rats with her and moved her into a city. Yes, I see you, Linda. Yes, they allowed her to take 2 rats. But we couldn't say anything. They're the police officers. So they took her away. We got the owner to give us permission just to go in and eradicate as many as we could. In the first day, the exterminator caught 3,000 rats. By the end of a 5-day period, he had caught over 23,000 rats. When we pulled up the tub, underneath the tub was a beautiful nest of all these little baby rats. And the thing is all these rats were very friendly. You could go and pick them up. They didn't run away from you. But the only reason they were discovered is because they got so many, they chewed through the fence and were hiding in the neighbors' water heaters. You know, the water heater closets that used to be outside of properties. And he went to look at his water heater while he was having problems and opened the door. And we found over 300 rats just alone in his water heater unit. So overall, it was a very exciting job. It never was boring. I loved training new officers and telling them the horror stories we found, but they kept life interesting, and I so enjoyed my time as a code enforcement officer. Thank you.
Great story, Karen. And I got to tell you, you came in at exactly 10 minutes. That was amazing. How did you do that? Exactly 10. So the next person up is Mr. Mark Berry. Now, I'm sure everybody here knows Mark Berry, but let me tell you, just in case you don't know, Mark is the founding member of the Auburn Winter Storytelling Festival. He's a great supporter of storytelling all through the region. But not only that, he is a great storyteller. And that's because he started listening to stories and appreciating them when he was only 5 years old. He would sit on his grandfather's knee, and his grandfather would tell him stories about working as a cowboy on the Oregon Trail. And he was a real cowboy. So that was Mark's inspiration. And today he's going to tell us a story entitled King Solomon's ring. It's all yours, Mark.
Thank you, David, and thank you, tellers. I love your personal stories. I always love hearing personal stories because I'll never hear that story anywhere else by any other teller. What I have today, September being Labor Day month, what I was reminded of was the labors of Benaiah, King Solomon's advisor, and it's a traditional tale from the Jewish tradition, and I know some of you have heard it before. This is one of the many ways this story could be told, and I hope you enjoy it. It takes place back in the days of King Solomon. Of course, we all remember King Solomon. He was the wisest king. You might remember the story of the two women who claimed the same baby, and he offered to slice the baby in half with his sword to find out who the true mother was. Well, this story takes place much later. He had been a great king for a long time. They had discovered King Solomon's mines, and so he was the richest person that had ever existed in his day. And they had built King Solomon's temple, which many of us have heard about. Well, in the temple, in the great room where he held audiences as king, he had advisors, of course, as all kings do. His oldest advisor, the one that had been with him the longest, was named Benaiah. And Benaiah, well, the other people thought that he might be a little bit full of himself, that he might just be suffering from the sin of pride, maybe a little too much. And King Solomon and the other advisors were all aware of this. And so one day King Solomon decided to pull a little prank on Benaiah and maybe help him to embrace more humility. And so he called Benaiah over for an audience, and he kind of winked out of the side of his eye at the other advisors, and they were all smiling. And King Solomon said, Benaiah, I had a dream, and in this dream, I was holding an object, and the object was such that when a rich man looked at it, he became sad. And when a poor man looked at it, he became glad. And I don't know what the object is, but you know, all my dreams are prophecies that always come true. So Benaiah, as my most trusted and wisest advisor, I'm entrusting you with the task of finding this object and bringing it to me before the great spiritual observation day of Sabbat, which, as you know, is coming in 2 weeks. Well, Benaiah had no idea how he could accomplish such a thing, but he could never refuse his king anything, of course. And so Benaiah went out and he started asking people about this, you know, what could it be? Something that when a rich man looked at it, he'd be sad, and when a poor man looked at it, he'd be glad. He asked everybody. He asked the merchants, of course, because they interacted with lots of people. He asked the philosophers. Nobody seemed to know any idea about what he might need. And he asked especially the caravan leaders, because they had been all over the world and talked to all different kinds of people. And Benaiah was branching out further and further in his quest and his to find King Solomon's request. And finally, it was almost time for Sabbat. In fact, it was coming up the next day. And so Benaiah turned around and headed back to King Solomon's temple empty-handed, not knowing what he was going to say to his precious king, but definitely concerned. And as he was entering their town, he noticed an old man sitting outside on the sand. And in front of the old man was a blanket, and there were some trinkets on the blanket. And Benaiah said, well, I might as well ask him. I've asked everybody else. And so he goes up to this old man and explains what he needs, something that when a rich man looks at it, he becomes sad. And when a poor man looks at it, he becomes glad. And do you have any idea? And the old man said, just a moment. I have just the thing. Well, Benaiah was skeptical, of course, but surprised and hopeful. So the old man picked up a ring. He picked up a silver ring, a very plain, ordinary silver ring off of that blanket. And the old man got out his etching tool and he began to etch the Hebrew symbols inside the ring. And after he had, took him a little while, after he had the symbols etched inside the ring, he held it up to Benaiah. And Benaiah, when he held the ring and looked in it, he was amazed. That was obviously what King Solomon had in mind. That was obviously just what he needed to take back. And so Benaiah took off his gold ring and gave it to the old man on the blanket, and he almost ran back into the temple. And when he got there, he went immediately into the great room. He didn't even stop and check and see what was going on in there or who might have an audience with the king. He just burst in, ran right up to King Solomon and said, "King, I have it. I have what you sent me to find, and I've returned before Sabbat, and here it is." Well, the king kind of smiled, and the other advisors kind of smiled, knowing that this had been a wild goose chase after all. But the king, you know, dutifully picked up the little plain silver ring, and he looked inside, and when he saw the symbols that were etched on the inside of the ring, he became very solemn and very serious, and he read the symbols again, and then King Solomon took off his jeweled, encrusted gold ring and gave it to Benaiah. And the king put that silver ring on his finger, and he wore it every day for the rest of his life. Because what it said in the symbols on the inside of that ring was the following. It said, "This too shall pass." And I think 2020 is a time for this story, so there it is.
What a great story, and how apropos, Mark. Very good job. Thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you, David.
That was great. Yeah, so next up is Linda Kennedy. Now, I'm sure that most of you know Linda. She's been a fixture of storytelling all through the region. She's been telling for 30 years at festivals, schools, story swaps, civic organizations. And she tells everything from traditional folk tales to personal tales. And the story she's going to share with us today is entitled Ma's Chores and Then Some. It's all yours, Linda. Take it away.
Thank you
Linda?
very much. Yes.
All right.
Okay. You know, Mark's story, I've heard before. I've told that story, but I've never thought of it with brilliantly the way you ended it with 2020. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. My story is a combination of folktale and personal story. For the last several years, except for this year because of COVID, I have had the honor of being a docent at a one-room schoolhouse for Living History Days for third graders. And the boys, they're on this little yellow school bus, and they get off. The boys are in their little plaid shirts and bandanas. Some are wearing cowboy hats. The girls are in bonnets and aprons. And they're carrying little tin buckets with calico lining with their lunch in it. And they come to learn what life was like there in that community, the farm community, about 150 years ago. They visit different centers while they're there. Well, first they go in the classroom, and they have little slates, and they do their reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then they break into groups. They go visit the blacksmith, and then some go listening or learning songs. Some learn old-fashioned parlor games. Some learn how to make biscuits. And then they come to me, and I tell them about what kind of hard work Ma had to do to run a good farmhouse and take care of the family. And my reference for that was chapter 2 in Laurel Ingalls Wilder, Little House for Big Woods, where she lists Ma's chores. And Ma had to work all day long running the house. But for the major jobs that she had to get done during the week, she had one day for each job. Monday, she did the laundry. That means pumping the water, filling the tub, heating the water on the stove, putting wood in the wood stove, and then scrubbing with a washboard. Tuesday, she did the ironing. More wood would go into that stove because she would have to heat the iron on top of that stove and then iron, and that would take all day. Wednesday, she did mending. Now, there was never a time when the hand didn't go up in my little group, and they would say, "What is mending?" And the children have no idea what it means to repair clothing. these days. On Thursdays, Ma did the churning, and I took a churn there, that one my husband had used when he was a kid on the farm in Mississippi. On Friday, Ma did the cleaning, and we had a straw broom and a duster for them to see. On Saturday, Ma did the baking. And then I told how baked goods were bought at the mercantile and often measured out of big bins, and you bought them by the pound or the ounce or by the dollar full or the 50 cents full. And I said one of the things they had was soda saleratus until about 1887, the company of Arm & Hammer decided to actually put soda saleratus in the little bright orange box and call it baking soda. And so after we had done all of them, handling all the things I would take for them to see what Ma's chores would really look like in those days, I would tell them a story that has its roots way back in Appalachia. And you may have heard it just a couple of nights ago on Genre Stories of Soda saleratus. And that story is about a little farm family. It was Ma and Pa and boy and girl, and they had a pet squirrel. That squirrel lived in a tree right outside the kitchen window. And come Saturday morning, they opened the kitchen window and let the squirrel sit on the windowsill. And after the biscuits were made with all of the ingredients, the squirrel would get one biscuit. But I mentioned all the ingredients. Ma went to the larder and she pulled out everything, but she had no soda saleratus. So she gave a dime to Boy and she said, Boy, skip and hop up to that mercantile and tell him you want 10 cents worth of soda saleratus. So he did that, and the merchant gave him a little brown bag with 10 cents worth of soda saleratus in it. And on the way back to the house, a big bear came up from underneath the bridge and swallowed that boy whole. I tell you, I'm not lying. And so back at the house, Ma is fretting. She has no soda saleratus and Boy is missing. So she says, girl, you go find out what's keeping your brother, what he's lollygagging all about. So she gets up and the merchant says, oh, he's been here, young lady. I don't know where he is now, but he's been here. So when she goes back over the bridge, that same old bear came up and swallowed her whole too. Now, Ma is getting really fretful back at the house, and she's telling Pa, what is going on with our kids? Would you please go and find out where they are? And she was just getting so upset about wasting all of that time. She picked up that mending basket, and she started sewing buttons on the clothes that had popped off buttons all that week. And while she was sewing, Pa went back up. He got to the merchant, and the merchant said, your boy and girl have been here. I don't know where they are. They are meandering and moseying around through the woods. I have no idea where they are. So Pa goes back over the bridge, and you know exactly what happened. That bear came up and said, I have room for one more. Swallowed that Pa whole. Now back at the farmhouse, Ma is very upset. She looks at that squirrel. She says, I've been knowing this for a long time. If you want a job done right, you've got to do it yourself. I'm going to have to go find those kids and Pa too. So she took off and she got up there to the merchant and he said, I don't know, ma'am. He says, your husband's been here. Boy and girl have been here and they have gone. I do not know where they are. So she goes over the bridge and yes, sir, Bob, that bear came up and said, I have room for one more. And down she went. Well, the squirrel now is the only one left at the farmhouse. And this is Saturday. He wants his biscuit. So he stops that fretting and he jumps down and he goes up that trail and he gets to the bridge. And there is that bear sunning himself over the top of the bridge. His seams are about to burst. He is so full, but he sees that squirrel. And he says, I have room for dessert. And the squirrel says, I don't think so. And the squirrel runs up the tree. The bear chases that squirrel up the tree. The squirrel runs out on a branch. The bear chases that squirrel out on the branch. The squirrel then jumps from that branch to the next tree. And the bear jumps from that branch into midair all the way to the ground and landed flat on his back, and his belly button popped off, and out came Pa, and out came Ma, and out came girl, and out came Boy, holding that little sack of soda saleratus. Well, Ma said, Pa, take the kids on home. I've got to talk to Bear a minute or two. And so she said, look here, Bear, what you've been doing is just totally not okay. You cannot treat people that way. You cannot do that. Now, listen here. I am willing to sew your belly button back on if you promise to go find another place in the woods to live and stop being ornery like this. Do you hear me? Oh, yes, ma'am, I won't do that again, said the bear. And so it was. The bear scampered off into the woods. Ma went back to the house where she found that soda saleratus and the family all waiting for those biscuits. She baked up the best old batch of biscuits they had ever had, and they all had one except the squirrel. You see, he had two because they said he was the hero for the day. Now, when I've told that story to my little group, I don't think there's ever been a time when some little ones, these are third graders, will say, is that true? And that's an opportunity then to do a little bit of storytelling education about folk tales, fairy tales, fantasy, what in a story can you identify that could be true and what couldn't be true. So my time there as a storyteller, not only talking about the labors of love of Ma's chores, is to also enlighten them on the craft of stories. Thank you.
Great story, Linda, and wonderful, wonderful, wonderful bear voice, by the way. It was great. It was a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So we've just gone over a little bit. So if you are here and you need to leave, that's one more teller left. His name is Andy. And Andy, I haven't known Andy very long, but he's been around for a couple years. I've met him at different festivals and I've heard his stories at the Guild. He's a great storyteller. And today he taught me a lesson about what a great tall teller kind of a person he is, because he sent me his bio with an outrageous thing here I'm going to tell you. It says, Andy has been telling stories since the age of 4, with his inaugural show taking place at the Kennedy Center. Well, either I'm really gullible or he's a heck of a storyteller, because I believed him. So anyways, he is pretty good. And it's all yours, Andy. Take it away.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate all the stories so far today, everybody. So my story is called So Many Jobs, and it's called So Many Jobs because I've had so many jobs. And you know, I really think it's by design. I remember being a little kid at the family gatherings, listening to all my aunts and uncles and stuff tell stories. And I was always amazed. You know, they'd say, 40 years ago, this happened. 50 years ago, this happened. I loved all the stories, and I couldn't believe that they were that old, that they could remember stuff 40 and 50 years ago. Well, now I understand. I understand what they meant by that. But so you see, from when I was just a little kid, I kind of thought that I wanted to be a storyteller. And I think that getting all the jobs that I've had, and they're all story-worthy jobs, kind of has led me to be worthy of being a storyteller. So my first job was working mowing lawns for my grandpa. And I thought I did a pretty good job. You know, I mowed the lawn and everything looked great. And he comes out there, his hands on his hip, he's looking at it, he goes, mow it again. I'm like, what? Why? And he goes, mow it again. Okay, fine. I mowed it again. And so I guess the lesson was there, you do what the boss tells you to do. I got it. Okay, no problem. Second job, I'm working for a French restaurant downtown. I'm 15 years old, and they gave me 2 things to do, which was one too many things for this 15-year-old brain of mine. One was making salads, and the other was cooking French bread, or garlic bread. So the salad part, that was all good. It was lots of fun, you know, nice fresh vegetables and stuff. But I kept forgetting about the garlic bread, and I burnt like 8 loaves of garlic bread. And so the owner was like a 5-foot-tall woman, about 100 pounds, maybe soaking wet. She got really, really mad at me, spitting at me. And she comes up and she's right in my face. And you've got to think about what you're doing. Think. Like, okay. I didn't burn any more French bread or garlic bread that day. And you know what? I think I kind of changed that day from being a 15-year-old kid to being a young adult who figured out that he had to think to keep a job. So, I mean, I've had so many jobs over the years. I learned the next job, I had to be on time. I mean, it was for a butcher, and I came in at 3:01. He paid me there to be there at 3 o'clock, and boy, was he ever mad, red-faced mad at me. Okay, I'll be on time. And then I learned that I had to do a job well, or else I'd get fired. Yes, folks, I have been fired, and that's my claim to fame, actually. I was a janitor for the Grateful Dead, and they fired me. But that's a story for another time. And I learned over the years you don't really always have a choice of where you're going to work. Sometimes life just gets in the way, and you've got to take the first thing that comes, whether you like the job or not. And you always got to do a good job. I've learned that there are mean bosses. I've had a few mean bosses in my time. Two in particular. One, what do you do when you have a mean boss? You either leave or you deal with it. So with the first one, I left. The second one, I dealt with until she left. Good decisions in both cases, but you know, there's mean bosses out there. I've learned that if you're dealing with the public, you're going to be dealing with people from all echelons of life, and the downtrodden deserve your respect. They deserve your empathy. So if you ever have to work with people who are at that level, you know, they have something to offer. I've learned that doing research on animals can be a murderous job. Oh my God. You know what happens to animals after the research is over, right? Anyway, research was not for me. I learned that the military is an incredible logistical machine. They have to do and move so many things that the logistics behind them is absolutely stunning and amazing. I've learned that food allergies and food service, I learned that food allergies are really, really important. If you don't pay attention to food allergies, you're going to kill somebody. So I've learned all that. And one of the most important lessons I've learned is that women make great firefighters. I was a firefighter for a summer in the National Forest, working side by side against women on the fire line, and their butts were on the line just as much as mine was, and those women worked as hard as I did. At that time, I became a proponent of women in the military as well. They were very, very good. But what I wanted to talk to you today about was a job where I had been working in hospitals for various reasons, and you have laughter in hospitals, you've got a lot of sadness, and you actually have a lot of fear. So starting with the fear, my first job as a professional was a registered dietitian. I was working at a Atascadero State Hospital. It's a hospital for the criminally insane. On my orientation day, I had a guy teaching us self-defense, how to, protect yourself if an inmate they call them patients there. If a patient goes off their meds and starts, going crazy, and they attack you, how do you protect yourself? And the biggest thing he left for us for that day was, don't ever trust a patient, no matter how long you've known them. The thing is, when the patients are on medications in a hospital, in a criminally insane mental health facility, they're like you and me. You can't tell that they're insane at all. But they often stop taking their meds, unbeknownst to anybody in the hospital, and they decompensate. And then they start seeing things and hearing things and thinking you're the devil, and they end up attacking. Well, sure enough, about a year after this guy gave us that lesson, he was killed by one of the patients. This guy he had known for 20 years, this inmate he had known for 20 years. He took him to the workshop to go get some tools and things, turned his back on him, and the guy picked up a hammer and ended his life. Just like that, after 20 years. It was very scary. Just to walk in the door was scary in that place. And then as a dietitian, the doctor ordered me to put this huge man, this huge monster of a man. He was 6'9", 350 pounds. He had terrible fat in his blood. And the doctor told me to put him on a diet. Well, this guy, years earlier, had been in a low or minimum security place, went on a picnic with 5 other patients and a psych tech. He killed all of them. On one picnic outing, he killed them all. And the doctor tells me to put him on a diet. So I'm, okay, fine. So I'm talking to him, sir, I have to put you on a diet. And he's looking up at me going, oh, I don't want to be on no diet. And I'm sir, I'm real sorry, but the doctor told me to put you on. I don't want to be on no diet. I'm sorry, sir. You'll have to talk with the doctor on that. So I put him on a diet. He cuts back, I cut back his portions basically. And every single time I went from a high security portion of that facility to the general population portion of that facility, that dude was down the hall sitting there waiting for me. Every single time looking straight at me. So for 3 days, I dealt with this guy. He was going to kill me. As far as I'm concerned, if I walked close enough to him, he was going to grab me and snap my neck, and that'd be the end of his diet. So I said, oh, forget this. And I took him off the diet. I said, I don't care, doctor. You can fire me, whatever. I'm not putting this guy on a diet. I never saw that patient again, ever. It was amazing. He just disappeared. He stayed there, but I never saw him. Then there are acute care hospitals I worked in as a blood drawer, phlebotomist, and as a dietitian. And you have a lot of patient contact in that situation. And the sad parts was going into a hospital room right after the patient had been notified that they have a terminal illness. And it was a real bummer. I had one lady, she was about 65 years old, very slim and trim, great diet, never smoked, didn't drink, exercised. And she was standing up, staring at me, crying because she had just been diagnosed with stomach cancer and she was near the end of her life. And it was just really, really sad. And then this other older guy, he was a preacher, retired preacher. He was lying in bed and I had to go in and talk to him. It was when I was a dietitian. I was getting his food preferences. And I'd walk in and he'd smile. He's, hello, how are you? It's so good to see you. And he made me feel that way every single time I walked into his room. So I walked into his room almost every day for a couple of weeks, and I was delighted to see him. And the last time I walked in, the bed was empty. There were no blankets, no sheets, no nothing. And well, what happened to Mr. So-and-so? And I said, well, I'm sorry, but he passed away last night. And I was just devastated. I was heartbroken. I really, really liked this guy. He was so blessed. He never complained. I never knew he was terminal. It was just really, really bizarre. I hope I die with that kind of dignity. On a lighter note, let's go back to the psych wards. Now, psych wards in acute care hospitals are quite a bit different than a Atascadero State Hospital. It's not nearly as scary. So I'm walking into a psych ward one time, and here's this kid. He's probably 20 years old, and he's strapped down to a chair because he had hurt himself earlier. So they strapped him down to a chair in the middle of the hallway, and he's going, God, untie these straps. God, untie these straps. Well, of course, nothing happened. God didn't untie the straps. But I walked by him, and he goes, I love you, as I'm walking by. Really, really sweet voice, So I thought, oh, I love you too, buddy, whatever. It's like, oh, it was kind of strange. Another time I walk into a room, patient's room, there were actually 2 beds in the room. This time I was a blood drawer, and I was going to take blood on the one patient, it was a female, and in comes the other lady and for the other bed, and she takes her little nightgown thingy off, and she just drops it on the floor, right when I'm standing there. I'm going, oh my God, I'm averting my eyes. I'm getting all shook up. I'm bundling my stuff up. I walk up past her. I was like, oh, jeez. Another time, some guy tried to hit me. I was taking his blood. He was lying flat like this, and he tried to hit me. He reaches just like that. He missed me. He was too slow. But, it made me think, so there's just no filters for those guys. When they're going through their crisis, they don't really have a filter going on in their brain. So they do whatever they're thinking, act whatever they're thinking. So when I'm out in the public, I always kind of wonder to myself, how many of these people want to punch me in the nose? How many of them want to tell me they love me? How many of them want to take their clothes off for me? It's like, thank God for filters. That's all I got to say. I finished off my career working for the Department of Education. I was a dietitian, so when I went into public policy, I started at Department of Education, school nutrition programs, school breakfast, school lunch. Went into curriculum development, special education, worked for the deaf and blind schools, worked in student support positions, and my favorite was working in after-school programs or expanded learning programs, where one day I wanted to teach kids how to tell stories. But it's kind of fitting that I ended up working for education, because who were the first educators? Storytellers were the first educators. We were the ones that were passing on the knowledge from generation to generation. And it's just a great way to educate kids right now, just as Linda Kennedy just told us. So now I'm retired and I'm looking forward to the next experience that I can write a story about or tell a story about, hopefully tell it to you guys. Thank you very much.
Great job, Andy. That was wonderful. Very good.
Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing all that stuff. And actually, you reminded me of something. And if everybody you can just hang on for a couple more minutes, I have a very short little story about a facility, because you reminded me of a facility. For those of you who don't know me, up until COVID, I told stories and did storytelling groups with seniors in all different kinds of facilities. But you reminded me of a story, and I like to tell it because it has to do with the power of storytelling. It's short, and then we'll end. But so I worked in this skilled nursing facility. Everybody there that would come to the group was in a wheelchair, and a lot of them had been in the facility for a very long time. There was one woman in particular. I know for a fact that she had been in the facility for 5 years. The only place that she'd ever gone was just outside. Those facilities aren't required to take them on outings or anything like that, although they are required to do activities with them. So they allowed me to do my creative storytelling group. And what I do in that is I show up with a large picture and that I have blown up, and I have the people identify who's in the picture, what's happening. And then at the end of that exercise, I improvise a story out of that. But before that even begins, I do adaptive improv exercises from improv theater with the patients. And so a lot of the same people would show up every week. And this woman showed up one day, and you could tell she'd been a great beauty in her day. She was tall and statuesque, but she was in a wheelchair. She was kind of crimped up in that chair. And you could tell she had all kinds of gadgets and things attached to her. And she never spoke. They just would wheel her in, and we would go around the room while I would do those improv exercises, and I would ask them to participate because those games are interactive. And she just would never say a word. And so about the 4th week, I was doing an exercise and it was her turn. And so the person before her finished, and I just turned to her and I said, "Oh, it's your turn. So if you want to, show this person." And this woman turned to the group and she just started telling a story. It was amazing. Her eyes lit up like the size of little saucers, and you could see the wheels in her brain turning. And she told that story for 5 minutes. And for that 5 minutes, all the people in the group, all these sick people who were stuck in this facility for a long time, listened intently and gave her their full attention. But the thing that was really amazing about it is that she never actually spoke a word. You see, she couldn't speak. She could only make strange sounds. But everybody there knew that she was telling a story, and everybody knew that she wanted to tell it. And so they all sat there and listened. So for me, that really solidified for me the importance of telling stories to different populations and why that's so important. And that was my inspiration to going out to many different facilities. So thank you for letting me share that story. Thank everybody for showing up.
Dave, I've got a couple of
unmute everybody. I'm gonna unmute everybody, socialize if you want. We can all hang out for a little bit. And then Ed, if you could be so kind and tell people what's happening next month, I think that would be nice. Ed?
Great. So I'm going to be the host for next month. It's Spooky Scary Stories, or Halloween Stories is the way it's listed. So any of you who, I think all of you have my email, if any of you want to tell a story, just contact me and we'll put you on the list. The genre storytelling event through
Oh, sorry.
it's okay. The genre storytelling event through the Storytelling Association of California, we've had 2 meetings so far. We've had about 50 attendees at each one. And our first one was personal stories. And then our second one was folk tales. And then of course this month it's spooky, scary stories. And we have Angela has volunteered to tell a spooky story for us. And then although she may or may not be selected, we take the idea with the genre storytelling is we take anyone from a swap group can be nominated from any swap groups throughout California. So you have to be a member of SAC, Storytelling Association, and then just participate in a local storytelling group. And you can be nominated for our different genres. So I've sent around a few things, but I'll send it around again. And look on the list because coming up in November is Telebration, and we are pairing with the San Diego group. And I sent out, or Joyce sent out an email to everyone asking if they wanted to be a teller. And we had a deadline and we got 4 people that sent me something back saying they wanted to be a teller. So yeah, I guess you know who you are. I don't have it in front of me right now. So we are set with that. We're going to have 4 tellers, and the Storytellers of San Diego, who we're pairing with, are having 4 tellers. And Karen is going to be our MC, and they have an MC, and basically they're going to introduce the event, and then with a proclamation for Telebration. So we won't have a meeting in November. It'll just be this Telebration meeting, and it's going to be a little later than our normal meeting. It will go 3:30 to 5:30, and we'll have 8 storytellers. So it'll be very interesting. And pairing with someone from the north and the south is the idea of pairing swap groups together. So we're really excited about doing that. And so we won't have a genre storytelling event then, but then in December, so if any of you are interested, look at, I'll send you around again if you don't have it, but I'll send out the schedule, and we've got it listed through August. So in December, it is sacred spiritual stories. In January, it's tall tales. Then it goes, February is romance stories. I don't remember the exact order, but there's historical stories, there's myths, there's legends, and a few others that I can't think of right off the top of my head. So make sure you look at those. And if any of you are interested, you just have to send me an email saying you want to do it.
Ed, quick question.
Yeah.
Question. This is Andy. So for October, this SSG is doing their thing. You're the host next month for us.
Yes.
And the theme is spooky, scary stories.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's also spooky, scary stories for the genre storytelling.
Right. And the
Okay.
genre one is on the third Wednesday of every month, and that will be 6 tellers from different story swap groups.
Okay.
And Angela, it sent in a while back when I sent around the email to all the events we have. She said she wanted to be a teller. So, yes, Karen, you're muted. You got to unmute yourself.
But I did. Are these supposed to be adult spooky stories, or can we have children's spooky stories?
They are, well, it's an adult audience, so adult oriented. But a lot of great children's stories are good for adults too. Just like, Sodi Saleratus that Linda told, that's a really good adult and children's stories. So there's going to be a wide repertoire of that.
Okay.
And then there's another event through the Storytelling Association of California, which is really exciting. It's called Stories in Living Color. And we will, I think an email has been sent out, but we'll send it around again. Joyce, you sent it out, I think, right? Did you send it?
Yeah, I sent it out once.
Yeah, so we'll send it out again as a reminder. It's next Thursday, September 24th, at 7 o'clock. I think it's 7 o'clock. And what that project is, people have paired up. Well, they said the storytelling is on social justice issues. So basically, two tellers get together. A black teller and a white teller is the concept for the first one. And the issues are social justice, racism, stereotyping, all kinds of things that relate to that. And the two tellers, there's a whole list of people that think they have a topic that relates to it. And then two people just get together and they find ways that their stories, their life experiences could intersect. And then they each develop their own story, and they have up to 20 minutes to actually tell the story. And then there's a 20-minute discussion when that's all over. So the idea is, and then any money raised goes to Black Lives Matter. So it's a paid event. I think it's, I'm not sure, but you can go on the Storytelling Association of California website to register for it. I think it's $10, or you can pay whatever you want. And so there will be two pairs of storytellers. So there'll be one person, one pair of two people, and then there'll be one more pair of two people. So, it's an hour or so presentation, or hour and a half or whatever. Because there is that discussion. The important part is the discussion that goes from that those two storytellers will lead for people to talk about those particular social justice issues. And if you want to do it, all you do is you go to the SAC website, you look at the Stories in Living Color, you click on it and you fill out the form that says what you have to offer that relates to this topic. And then you submit that form. And then you can look at anyone else's form and think, okay, I could pair up with you. And Angela and I have done that. We have sent in a form and we paired together, and we're working on trying to develop a story. And so they're going to have a few events, and then they're going to send this around to events all over the world. So like a place in Sacramento, Washington, D.C. is going to put on an event, and they're going to use our paired storytellers. So there's a lot, it's just going to go on for quite a while, and it's very exciting. That's it for me at this point.
I have something.
Thanks, Ned.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Good stuff.
Oh, hey, I want to be sure Sherry says something. Andrew, when you're on screen,
Yeah.
the bottom part of your face doesn't show because you got a hole going to your background.
Okay, let's try to.
Yeah, it's just your background. That's all. Your background is interfering with just a
Okay.
small part of your face. There, it's fine.
Now you can see my blue screen.
Yeah,
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
that's better.
My gray beard was not going well with the background.
Yeah, it did. All right, Sherry, what do you have?
We've been working on the Auburn Winter Storytelling Festival, which is coming up in January. We're
Nice.
trying to come up with some system, some idea of having a storytelling, a little bigger event. And we are thinking about streaming on YouTube. I wondered if any of the other people here today has had has ever done that? Does it work? Is it, do you actually need to film it and then cut it into pieces, or will streaming
Are
work?
you talking about live streaming?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so some of the storytellers that I follow in Europe do live streaming events. And the way that I understand it, so I don't know for sure, but this is just what I heard,
Mhm.
was that you get on YouTube, you have your account, but you have to meet certain criteria before you can start doing live streaming. So if you're going to do that in January, I would suggest you start figuring out if you have to do anything to work up to that. Because I follow this one particular storyteller from the Netherlands who is phenomenal. He travels all over Europe. He does stage performances to big houses, all that kind of stuff. And at the beginning of the COVID thing, he started doing stuff on YouTube, and he was complaining about that because he had to work up to that somehow. So I don't know all the particulars, but that's what I remember about the live streaming, because I've thought about that too.
All
But
right.
I mean,
That's
what
a
a
good
lot of
thought.
people
I'll
do
look
is
into
they do
that.
the Zoom thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I've seen them. I've seen live streaming done on Facebook as well. The Sacramento Poetry Center is doing a lot of that. They might be a good group for you to talk to.
The
Yeah,
Sacramento.
and the Storytelling Association of California, if you're a member of that, their technology expert puts on all kinds of events. So they could, you might pair up with them and do a live streaming thing through them.
Oh,
And
okay.
who is that tech guy, Ed?
His name is Shags. He comes on every month. He's right now he's celebrating the Jewish holidays this weekend, so he's not on. But he comes to all these events, all these Zoom events from the storytelling guilds all over California.
So that's not Steven Chagrin's, right?
Yeah, Stephen Chagrin. Yeah, Shags.
Yeah.
They call it.
All right, that's what I was thinking. All right, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure he knows all about that. And
I'm sure he does.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Sherry, if you're interested, I could contact him, or I can send you his email, and you could.
Would you do that, Ed? Yeah, and just collecting information for what we're going to do. I've talked to David Burns. We have use of the building again, so it just seems like it's a big building. We can have 5 to 10 people there with masks on, taking turns on the stage and having it streamed, I would think.
Yeah.
We've always done it for free, so it's not as if someone has to pay admission to watch it on YouTube. So
Yeah, and they're doing this all over the world. On October 5th, I'm going to be telling us, there's a group called the Storytelling Institute of India, or I can't remember exactly what, but the last February, the organizer of that put on an event, worldwide event, and had tellers from all over the world. It was really amazing. So I found out about him, and on October 5th, I'm going to be telling a story at one of his events. And there's a storyteller from Australia, 3 tellers from India, a South African teller, and myself. And of course, they do it. What's that?
You're going to be representing.
So they do this, it's at 7 o'clock at night, and there's 12 and a half hours difference. So I'll be coming on about 7:30 in the morning. The next day, actually.
It's on my calendar.
Yeah.
Ed, do you know how that is being presented? Is it Zoom or Facebook Live or what? Do you know?
I don't know the specifics. Yeah, I mean, because he sent it to me, but it's a link. I'm just going to log on to it like we do for this, but I don't know the specifics because I'm not technology enough oriented. But I will send around also that that event so you can look. And I mean, you'd have to be up. Actually, I'm the last teller at 7:30 in the morning, so. For you'd have to get on about 5 or something, or 6:30, but it's going to be recorded, so you can register and watch it later if you're interested. But it sounds really fascinating. And one of the storytellers came to the first genre storytelling event. He put this flyer out, and 2 people from one of his classes he teaches came to the first genre event. And when I saw, someone from India, hello, how are you? And then she came on and she introduced herself, and the guy from Nepal did the same thing. Nice. And I guess, and she's kind of a really amazing storyteller. So she came, I invited her to be a guest speaker. So she did a folktale for us on, on last Wednesday night. And she's an unbelievable storyteller. And she had some instruments. She had some traditional garb on with her folktale. I'm definitely going to keep in touch with her. And she's going to be a teller at that event that I'm doing on October 5th. So.
Yeah, I'm so bummed I missed it. I had it on my calendar and everything, but my kid came over.
Yeah.
Gotta give
Yeah, well,
priority to my kid.
And the way you get onto these events, like the genre event, like I think you can go register now for the next one, and the third Wednesday of the month. You just register, and you'll be sent a link. You just go into SAC under genre storytelling. You click on it, and you just register. And you can leave a donation if you want. We split the donations with all the tellers. That's for all their events. Same thing. You just go to the event and click on it, and you can register. So yeah, if Sherry, are you a member of SAC?
No.
Okay. Well, you might want to join and get
That's pretty
involved.
good.
But maybe you have someone else who's a member, like Mark. Mark's a member, so it doesn't have to be every. He could be the liaison to and Linda is a member. So that you could definitely take advantage of what they have to offer through members.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your help. We'll